Hi, Acadiana. Meteorologist Dave Baker on this Friday. Boy, it was a stormy one early today, and we had a lot of the flooding rains. We'll go over some of the rainfall totals on that before we get into some of the tropical stuff. But I will say, yesterday we started to see a few trends in a couple of the models, and it looks like a couple of more models are at least trying to bite. So we might be talking about something a little more interesting as we get into next week. Right now, the weekend, though, the Father's Day weekend should be just fine. But as we go into next week, we might be looking at some development maybe down to our south over parts of the Bay of Campeche. So we'll look at the models and we'll discuss that in just a little while. We've got a lot of cloud cover right now here in Lafayette. Our temperature holding at 72 degrees. That is a rain-cooled 72 since it is high noon here in June when normally it would be pushing 90 by this point in time. But all that heavy rain keeping the temperatures a little bit cooler. Unfortunately, the rains have stopped over most of the Acadiana region, but we saw a tremendous amount of rain over parts of Acadiana. Right now, it looks like locally traffic seems to be moving along okay on the interstates, but there could be some flooded roadways still left over. So do keep that in mind if you got to do some traveling a little bit later on today. So let's look at the current radar here. And it is showing quite a bit of rain that's still extending over parts of St. Mary Parish, where we're getting moderate rain for the most part. And then we've got a new flood warning that looks like it's popped up there over toward the Lake Charles area, as we've had a consistent amount of rain, very similar to what we saw here in Acadiana, where you had development to the south, and then the thunderstorms would kind of race off toward the northeast. And we've got a little bit more development there right along the Gulf Coast. Now, it appears that the development of that is pushing farther offshore. So hopefully most of that rain will stay in the offshore waters and not kind of redevelop here over the Acadiana region, but there could still be some flooding rains out there. Did want to show you real quick, just going to play around here with the storm totals that we've got so far, and where most of our warnings were over parts of Lafayette, St. Martin, Iberia, and into Vermilion parishes. If you look at some of these radar estimates of 7 to 8 inches of rain, maybe a little bit closer to 9 here over parts of Iberia Parish, and I have looked at a few backyard electronic rain gauges through that area and seeing those totals that run anywhere between maybe 6 and 8 inches of rain are pretty common on some of those. So that actually might be verified. So a lot of rain out there, and there is more rain that's developing back to our west, and it looks like it's going to stay kind of unsettled with that upper trough kind of sticking around as low pressure moves away from us. That center of that low now has moved over the middle part of the country up there in Missouri, and that's going to push a little bit farther to the east, but you can still see that it's got a bit of a trough right in there, so that's going to tap into some of that Gulf moisture, which could pull back into Louisiana, and the chances for rain are going to be staying high as we head into the weekend. And we do have a flood watch that will remain in effect until Saturday evening for most of the Acadiana area. We do have a flood warning that's in effect, though, for the Vermilion River, as it's expected to crest at about 12 feet sometime tomorrow. In the offshore waters, it's not a great day because of the thunderstorms. So if you're planning on doing some boating out there, you might want to wait a while. Those winds and seas are going to be a little bit stronger. And of course, you've got those bigger thunderstorms that are out there. So there's a look at the Gulf waters, and you can see that moisture just kind of pulling in there from the southwestern part of the Gulf and then lifting into that trough and pulling northward. So again, we're going to see that rain chance staying pretty high here over the course of the weekend. The rest of the Gulf, though, is looking okay, and we don't expect anything to happen there, at least over the next couple of days. But we do have a bit of a tropical wave kind of combined with an upper trough that's moving over the western part of the Caribbean. And that's been generating quite a bit of rain there east of Nicaragua and north of Panama and Costa Rica. But it looks like northern Honduras is starting to catch some of those heavier rains. And I think that is also going to start to drift a little bit farther toward the west or maybe west-northwest. And then as the energy kind of gets in this particular area, there's a chance that we might see some formation there over the western part of the Bay of Campeche. There's a quick look at the Caribbean. Again, most of the action is over the western Caribbean, nothing that's showing any signs of organization at this moment, but in the models, it does seem like something wants to try to come together. You can also kind of see on this visible satellite imagery, there is quite a bit of Saharan dust over the central and eastern Caribbean, and then that extends out into the Atlantic as well. And then it kind of cuts off a little bit there, maybe a few hundred miles east of the Windward Islands. But you've got a pretty decent tropical wave now that looks like it's coming off the African coast. Usually these don't turn into a whole lot this early in the season, but sometimes they do. Beryl last year was one of those examples there at the end of June where we've had a pretty vigorous tropical wave move off, and that one became a Category 5 hurricane about halfway across the Atlantic Ocean toward the latter part of June and the early part of July. So it can happen, but it doesn't look that likely now. And the National Hurricane Center is saying there's no tropical cyclone activity expected here over the next 7 days. All of the action so far for hurricane season has been on the Pacific side. Now, the Pacific side starts hurricane season a bit earlier than the June 1st date that we have over on the Atlantic side. It starts on May the 15th, so we've almost got a whole month under our belt, and we've already had 3 named storms out there, including one hurricane that was Barbara earlier in the week, but you can see this gathering of moisture here. That's the next one that's probably getting going. It's a tropical depression right now. It's number 4E. And the forecast does bring it up to tropical storm status. So if it gets a name, it will be called Delilah. Now, looking at the global tropics hazard outlook, you can see for week 2 and week 3. So this is kind of an extension of the tropical weather outlook that you have here that comes from the National Hurricane Center. The global tropics hazard outlook also comes from NOAA, but kind of gives you a week 2 and a week 3 of the possibilities of some tropical cyclone formation. And for week 2, starting June 18th, which is next Tuesday, it still is looking at the possibility of something maybe starting there around Central America. Whether it's going to be on the Pacific side or whether it's going to be on the Bay of Campeche is still yet to be seen. But you can see week 3, most of the Atlantic basin does start to quiet down going into the first week in July, but the Pacific side wants to stay pretty active. So we might have several named storms there on the Pacific side, but you've also got that Central American gyre that's going to be kind of doing its duty here. It kind of runs there over Central America, and you get these disturbances that kind of rotate around that giant low, and occasionally you can get something to maybe fire up here or here during the month of June, and that's typically where we would see tropical development during this part of the year. So real quick, I want to go through some of the models, and I'm going to start with the GFS here, taking you out 10 days. The GFS does go out 16 days, every computer model run, which runs 6 times a day. But you'll see here going out 10 days, you're starting to see that moisture building there over Central America. I will say several of the GFS models over the past several days have generated a low pressure area over the Bay of Campeche. It looks like it's hinting at it here toward next Thursday, Friday of next week. But this latest model is a little more inconclusive compared to some of the earlier models that I've seen. And I do have the Tropical Tidbits website link down in the description below. So if you want to go back and look at some of the earlier models so you can see the consistency from model run to model run when it comes to the GFS, there's been a lot of that over the last week, maybe even 2 weeks. In fact, it seems like the GFS has been trying to develop something tropical either in the Caribbean or the Gulf pretty much each and every day since the beginning of hurricane season. But it's only really been this week that it seems to be concentrating on one area. So once we see that consistency from model run to model run, you start to compare those to some of the other computer models. And the Euro model really isn't showing anything there going into late next week. There's Monday, Tuesday, and now we're into Wednesday and Thursday. And you see that moisture building over Central America, but you don't really see a defined center of low pressure. The Euro was starting to bite a little bit yesterday, but it seems to have backed off at least on this latest computer model run. The Canadian model, though, yesterday was starting to agree with the GFS and trying to form something. And as we get in, this is Wednesday, now Thursday and Friday of next week. Look at that. You can see that low pressure area right there along the Mexican coast on the western part of the Bay of Campeche, which is kind of similar to what the GFS has been doing for the last couple of days. So when you start to see additional computer models showing this, you start to get a little more confidence in the forecast that something might happen. And finally, we'll look at the icon model, which does only go out 7 days. So it's only going to take us out till about Thursday of next week. But you can see there's a little more of a concentration of moisture, but anything tropical looks like it's going to stay on the Pacific side. But you get a little bit there toward the end where a bit of a trough might be trying to work its way along the Mexican coast sometime next week. So at this point, it doesn't appear that we're going to be seeing any tropical weather, but some of the models are at least hinting that maybe hurricane season wants to finally get started here toward the end of the month of June. In June, again, the Gulf, the Western Caribbean, the Yucatan Channel, and then right there along the East Coast from the Bahamas up to the Carolinas are your most likely area that you would see tropical development this month. It does start to expand a little bit more in July, and then by August, it shoots its way well out into the Atlantic Basin, where basically all of the waters are open for business. But usually during the month of June, the most likely place that you're going to see tropical development is going to be near Central America, near the Yucatan, or perhaps in the Bay of Campeche. So when the models are trying to do that, they're also probably grabbing onto what's normal for the month of June, and that's where you start to see some of these tropical systems trying to get going. And of course, June really isn't a very busy month, so it is a good time to get yourself prepared. There's several lists that I put on my social media pages yesterday just to give you an idea of how to get ready for the hurricane season in general. And then there's a couple of other lists, one a week out if it looks like we're in the crosshairs of a tropical system, and another one that's just 72 hours out if we know that a tropical system is imminent. So if you want to follow my social media pages, you can find that there, and you can look at that list and maybe get your stuff together as you go into the weekend. Water temperatures, of course, are plenty warm to sustain tropical weather. All of our water temperatures are above that 80-degree threshold. These numbers, if you're new to Let's Talk Tropics, are in Celsius, so you're looking at 26.5. So basically everything that's yellow or brighter on this map are waters that are warm enough to be able to sustain tropical activity. And those waters are slightly above normal there across the Gulf, but slightly cooler than average across portions of the Caribbean Sea. And then getting a little bit farther off toward the east, we've got some cooler than average water. But remember, those water temperatures are already warm enough to be able to sustain tropical activity. So if something wants to form out there, as long as the right atmospheric conditions are there, it should be able to strengthen. Tropical cyclone heat potential is the other thing, another one of the tools in the toolbox to kind of help us out with forecasting tropical storms and hurricanes. So when you look at your water temperature map here, this is the measurement of the water temperatures right at the surface. The tropical cyclone heat potential measures how deep those 80-degree waters go. So the deeper they go, the more energy is there for a tropical system to work with. And if you have something that's got the good atmospheric conditions, such as low wind shear, sometimes tropical systems can run over these warm areas and rapidly intensify. You can go from a tropical depression to a hurricane and nothing flat a lot of times when you see that high ocean heat content. Now, speaking of the shear is one of the things that's going to be kind of going against any tropical weather trying to develop in this particular area. You can see the shades of red and yellow and orange. That indicates high wind shear. Wind shear tends to tear developing systems apart pretty easily. So if you've got just some kind of a weak, low pressure area in those regions, perhaps here off the Honduran coast, you've got a little bit of low wind shear due to an upper trough that's right in there. But out here to the west, that wind shear is pretty strong, and it's also pretty strong out here in the Caribbean too. But remember, those computer models were trying to forecast something for late next week. So this is the way the shear map looks, at least according to the GFS, as we go into midday on Thursday. And you can see there's a little bit of some lower wind shear there over the western part of the Gulf near the Bay of Campeche. So if it can squeeze in there, it might have at least a little bit of a chance for some development sometime late next week. Finally, we'll look at the Saharan dust. You were able to kind of see that a little bit on the visible satellite imagery. but this is more of an infrared that can show us more in detail of where that Saharan dust is. It's pretty thick coming off the African coast and going about 3/4 away across the Atlantic. You got another plume that runs there north of Cuba and through the Bahamas and over toward Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And you got a little bit of Saharan dust that's still lingering there over parts of the Gulf. So right now, we are not anticipating anything to happen over the next couple of days, but I would stay tuned next week where we might find our first tropical depression or named storm. Does not look like it's going to be affecting us here in the Acadiana region, but of course, it's something that we want to watch out for anytime we're in the middle of hurricane season. Well, I hope you enjoy this broadcast of Let's Talk Tropics. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on those notifications. Remember, you can hear my forecast daily on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And please follow my social media pages. You can find those preparation lists there. They're on Facebook. You can also follow my social media pages there on X, where I post severe weather warnings or flood warnings or any other updates that we'll have throughout the day today or over the weekend. And of course, thanks to everyone who has already subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today right here on YouTube. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Hopefully you will stay dry over the course of the weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.